I'm Daphne. I'm one of the podcast hosts here at CCIR, and it's our pleasure today to have with us Emma. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, like how old you are, how long you've been with CCIR, what grade you're in, these kinds of things.
My name is Emma, and I'm from the US. I'm currently in 10th grade, and I was with CCIR for their summer program, the Future Scholar program, I believe. So I was in the 2023 summer cohort.
Amazing. Great. Yeah, and so I'm curious to hear a bit about your research topic, what you focused on, and how you found it.
So the title of my paper was Exploring the Various Biomarkers of Parkinson's Disease as Potential Diagnostic Tools. And so our cohort focused on Parkinson's disease from pathogenesis to intervention with Dr. Detmer. And so as we were learning about Parkinson's disease, something unique about it is how slow the onset is and how the pathogenesis can start up to a decade prior to the clinical manifestation of the motor symptoms. And so that's why patients have to rely on symptomatic treatments after diagnosis to alleviate their discomfort and aim to improve their quality of life, since by the time of diagnosis, it's too late to really alter the progression of the disease. And so the disease modifying treatments that are currently being developed haven't seen that much improvement. And so if we could find the signs and symptoms of early Parkinson's disease and improve the time of diagnosis, then it could potentially increase the chances of finding an effective disease modifying treatment and hopefully a cure. And so unlike Alzheimer's disease, it is not a dementia and instead a motor disorder, and is characterized by the excessive loss of dopaminergic neurons. And by the time of diagnosis, it's often about 50 to even 70% of the dopaminergic neurons that have been lost already. And this is important because dopaminergic neurons are essential in the motor pathway in the basal ganglia and the substantia nigra. And so with excessive loss, the patients lose their motor control and all of that, and it can greatly impact their quality of life. It can even be very debilitating as well.
Wow, that sounds really, really interesting. Yeah. And how did you decide on this topic in particular?
So based on all of we learned from the lectures from Dr. Detmer, it really got me interested in how pathogenesis could start so early and go undetected before having those clinical manifestations. And so there have actually been signs that researchers have found in common between from the early Parkinson's disease, such as constipation, REM sleep disorder, hyposmia, which is a loss of smell, and even the alpha-synuclein and the theory that it starts from the gut instead of in the brain. And so I found that to be really interesting and wanted to delve deeper into the topic.
Interesting. And had you done similar things before in school? Had you always been interested in medicine and science and these kinds of things? Or is this a more new phenomenon for you?
So at school, I was always interested in neuroscience and health and the body in general. And actually, last year, I actually got the opportunity to also do another research paper and focused on the connection between Alzheimer's disease and glioblastoma, which is a brain tumor. And I find that to be really interesting. And so during the summer cohort, when I learned about Parkinson's disease, which is another neurodegenerative disease, I thought it'd be interesting to go into that and also note the similarities and differences between Alzheimer's as well.
Interesting. Okay. And how did you find the experience itself? Like, had you worked on research projects in your class, or I know you had a similar one regarding Alzheimer's and the connection to that with brain tumors, but with regard to school versus CCIR, this kind of very different academic setting, working one-on-one with a professor and having peers follow along a similar program, but not being in this kind of rigid set schedule of school. Was that different for you, that different educational structure, that learning atmosphere? Was it exciting? Was it challenging? How did you find that shift from 10th grade, from high school into a university setting?
So I found that to be really exhilarating and unique because in my public school setting, we don't really get these opportunities to do individual research like this. And the setting with CCIR was a lot more flexible, and I felt it was a lot less stressful because it was in a smaller class. And so I felt more free to ask questions to the professor and interact with my peers more. And this was a really unique experience because I also got to interact with people with similar interests as me and got to have lectures from a professional in the field in comparison to public school where I didn't really get this opportunity before.
So it was actually exhilarating rather than challenging. That's great. Wow. No, it's very impressive. Yeah. So talk me through a bit about how your research paper kind of came to be. What was the process of shaping that paper from, you were saying you gained this interest from listening to the lectures themselves, and the end of the very long process is you have this paper in front of you. So walk me through how the ideas came to you, how they formulated, and then they turned into the actual linguistic crafting of this research paper. How did you find crafting your outlines and conducting your research, and what led to actually the paper being finished? How was that process for you?
So after listening to all the lectures from my professor and going on PubMed to find articles more about the different topics, um, I found that the potential early diagnostic biomarkers to be really interesting and relevant to the field because, as mentioned before, with the very late diagnostic time and all these effects, it would be really beneficial if we were to find these early biomarkers and all of that for early diagnosis. And so actually before, it took a while for me to find my topic actually, and I was interested in the inflammation aspect of Parkinson's disease as well. But after finding more about it, I realized that there have been attempts and trials for inflammatory regulation and treatments regarding inflammation, but they didn't seem to be that effective. And I think that was more due to it wasn't really treating the underlying cause, and rather inflammation was more of an effect. And so by focusing on the causes, it would be more effective to find these potential disease modifying treatments and make more of an impact as well.
Interesting. And did you get your research from past cases or past articles, like scientific articles of scholars who studied this before you, or how did you kind of get the data together?
Yeah, so I went on PubMed and tried to see and read all these studies regarding um, how people found these correlations between people with early Parkinson's disease, again, such as the constipation, REM sleep disorder, and hyposmia, and all of that. And between all these different studies, I found some similarities between them, like how some of them were uh, some of them were clinical biomarkers and some of them were more proteins like like alpha-synuclein. And going through all these papers, I collected these information and did more and created a conclusion and summary in my own paper using all of these different sources and research studies and all of these.
Right. So you kind of gathered their research and almost put your own take on it, your own kind of expansion on it. Very interesting. Would you hope to conduct like clinical trials and research yourself one day? Would you hope to pursue this, like push further into the medical field, or would you like to stick more closely to the research-based side of it, kind of dissecting others' research, or where do you see this kind of taking you in the future?
I would really love the opportunity to one day be able to do these researches in person and conduct my own studies. And the
Mm.
thing about Parkinson's disease is since it takes a long time for the symptoms to manifest, it would have to be longitudinal studies where it'd be over
Mm.
a long period of time. So it would take a lot of time and dedication to conduct these studies and keep track of the progress and all that. And I hope to one day be able to do that.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant, definitely. Yeah, I'm curious if you had to choose another research topic at this point, what are you looking to study next? What is your next interest? I'm curious.
One thing that really struck me as intriguing in my the paper I just did regarding the potential early diagnostic biomarkers was that hyposmia, which is the loss of smell, was really found to be in Parkinson's disease patients, which I thought to be interesting because I initially wouldn't have thought that the degradation of dopaminergic neurons would have also led to the loss of smell and the degradation of the olfactory bulb. And when I was also researching Alzheimer's, I also found that Alzheimer's patients had the loss of smell as well, and found this to be an interesting correlation of how these two neurodegenerative diseases also had the loss of smell and the decrease in mass of the olfactory bulb, when I initially wouldn't have thought there to be a connection. And so for future research, I would also like to delve deeper into this topic. And as a field right now doesn't really know the cause of why, it would be interesting to research, find more about that.
That's so interesting. Wow, wow, I didn't know that actually. Um, yeah, that I think that's really fascinating. What would you say is the most challenging part of this research project so far for you?
I would say the most challenging part is going through all these papers and deciding what to include and what to omit, because there's a lot of excess information that may not be pertinent to the topic, but is still really interesting. And deciding what to include and exclude is also really important to making sure the paper is concise and that it's straight to the point and doesn't get sidetracked, even though there's so many interesting things in the field.
Oh, definitely. Do you have any tips for others who maybe are starting the one of their own research projects right now with CCIR? Do you have any tips for our new and up and coming students?
I would say don't just do it for the resume, because if you truly have an interest in curiosity and learning and exploring new things, I would say really to go for it and focus less on the academic accolades and, oh, I can put this on my resume, but more of fostering your curiosity and your interest in what you truly want to find out. And also to not be afraid to explore with the different topics and venture into different fields and not just focus solely on one thing, so you can consider different perspectives as well.
Why do you think that it's important to push your academic horizons, if you will? Why do you think it's important to branch out from just what you're used to or comfortable with or initially interested in? Why is that kind of pushing out into the horizon important?
Because what you may be interested in now may not be what you're really interested in later. And so if you keep pushing your boundaries and exploring new topics that you otherwise wouldn't have gone into, you might be surprised in what you find interesting and what you actually want to go into.
That is a brilliant answer. That's very well said, I think. Yes, I think that's a really interesting research paper you've crafted there. I'm very impressed with it. It sounds really interesting. I'd love to read it, and I hope to see some clinical studies done by you in the future. I think that aspect of this being a very long-term degeneration of the body and this disease, this pathology taking over the body over years, if not decades. Is that correct? Yeah, I think that aspect of it makes the research all the more beguiling. And I think a lot of pathological studies don't have that very tricky component to them because they can kind of just conduct the research under a controlled kind of bubble and condition, and they can kind of study what's happening there. But do you hope, or maybe I'm sure you hope, but do you think that they will be able to conduct these kinds of things, these kinds of studies in the near future in a way that these genetic markers, these genetic conditions, these symptoms, like you mentioned, constipation, loss of smell, do you think that one day, quite soon, we will get to a point where we are able to identify the onset 10, 15, even 20 years in advance?
I think that could be a possibility considering the research, the ongoing research as of right now, and how researchers are isolating different aspects of Parkinson's disease and trying to figure out the details and the causes behind the pathogenesis and the pathology. And so I think potentially it could be. And also one unique treatment option that is being developed is that researchers are trying to grow their own dopaminergic neurons in hopes to help the patients regrow them. And I think that is a really unique take. And if this technology is possible in the near future, I think it would make leaps and bounds in this field.
That sounds very, very promising. Yeah, I definitely hope so too. What would you say is the most exciting um, medical development in recent years? What are you most excited about? What have you read about recently? What have you heard about that you're like, this is going to be amazing in the scientific field of medical research? Yeah, I'm curious.
I think that would be the research around stem cells and how researchers are trying to grow different cells and differentiate them from the stem cells in attempts to help medical research and all of that, and how the stem cells can become a lot of things, and also the micro. Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. Yeah, I think now we have so many kind of we have so many technological advances, of course, in all fields, not just medical fields, but I think technology has really opened these doors in a way that we've never seen before. And we're seeing an explosion, honestly, of development. I think that's happening right now in medical research and medical kind of programs that further people's health. I think even cancer studies. I've heard recently cancer rates are dropping. Sorry, deaths from cancer are dropping, and I think it's research like what you've conducted here today with CCIR that is furthering this and making the future more bright. I think so. I'm very interested to read your paper, and I am very impressed with listening to this. So thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Yes, and thank you so much for your time as well.